Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. Today I'll share with you a few things to be looking out for in the garden as we head into July. Dr. Lou Anella explains how to install a frost-free water hydrant. We talk daylilies with garden blogger Dee Nash. And then I'll show you 3 ways to save money while being environmentally friendly. As we head into July, insects and water are the 2 main things to be thinking about in the garden. Now, when we think about water, drip irrigation is probably the most efficient way to water your garden, as it puts the water right next to the plant so you don't lose as much to evaporation. Now, if you are using a sprinkler system, whether that's one that you've attached to your hose or one that's in ground that pops up, one way to monitor the amount of water that you're putting in your landscape is to get a simple tuna or cat food can and place those around your landscape. So as you're irrigating with that over-the-top irrigation, the water that you can collect, you can see how much you're applying. Now you want to make sure that at this time in July you're applying about 1 inch to 2.5 inches per week. And also keep in mind that new plants are going to be more susceptible as they don't have a well-established root system. Now, plants aren't the only thing that need water in our landscape. There's also our wildlife that we need to consider. And one of the best ways to help our feathered friends is by cleaning out our bird baths and reintroducing new fresh water for them. Unfortunately, birds aren't the only thing that are attracted to those bird baths. Mosquitoes, you might find, are also attracted to them. And a simple way to control mosquito larvae in those bird baths is to introduce mosquito dunks. Now, this is a biological product that contains Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria also known as BT. And you can simply take one of these dunks and throw those in there. They are not harmful to birds or pets, so it's an easy way to control that mosquito larva. Now, mosquito larvae won't just find its way into bird baths. You also want to make sure that you haven't inadvertently left containers out around your landscape that might be holding water as well, whether that's irrigation water or rainfall, as those will become breeding grounds for mosquitoes in the future. So make sure you've tipped over any containers that might also hold water, including those tuna cans once you've kind of checked your irrigation level. The other thing is we have a lot of insects that are starting to occur in July just as those temperatures heat up. Proper identification is important to find out whether they are friend or foe, because there are good insects out there as well. Now, one insect that you might in particular be finding that love hot, drier conditions are the spider mites. Spider mites are often identified on plants by the stippling or bronzing look that's on their leaves as they suck out that plant sap. You also might find, as the name implies, a little bit of webbing from those spider mites on the plants. Now, another way to easily test whether you have spider mites is to take a white sheet of paper and tap the plant over that white sheet of paper. Depending on your eyesight, you might think you just have left a little bit of specks of dust on that white sheet of paper, but if you put your thumb on there and kind of smear those specks, you'll notice that there are red stains on that white sheet of paper, and that indicates that you do indeed have spider mites. An easy way to control those spider mites would be to get a strong stream of water from your hose and spray those plants down, washing those spider mites down to the ground. One final thing you want to be monitoring as we head into July is the nutrients that might be in your pecans and other fruit trees. Now, you might have done a soil sample earlier in the season and have been fertilizing your plants based off of that soil test results that you got back. However, those results tell you the nutrients or the deficiencies in your soil, not necessarily the amount of nutrients that's been taken up by the plants. A foliar analysis will tell you the exact nutrients or deficiencies of nutrients that are in that plant. So July is a great time to take those foliar samples. It's just a little bit more of an accurate test and a tool to use to know your plant's needs. Here are some more hort tips for the month of July.
Today we'd like to talk to you about frost-free hydrants. These are tools that farmers and ranchers have been using for almost 100 years. It was invented in 1929, and you might find a need for this in your landscape at home. So there are a couple things about it that I'd like to point out. The main thing to know is that it's frost-free because the water drains out of a small hole down here at the bottom of the hydrant. So we usually bury the hydrant at least 2 feet deep. In Oklahoma, our soils don't freeze all that deeply, if at all, so we don't have to worry about it too much. But typically a water line is 18 inches in the ground at the least, and very often deeper, especially where it's important to be deeper because of the frost line. So the water weeps out of this little drain hole here, and that's what makes the top part of the hydrant frost-free. There's no water in the top part of the hydrant. So the handle to turn the water on is up at the top of the hydrant, but the valve is down here. So the water leaks out of this little hole. There is no water then in the rest of the hydrant, and so therefore it doesn't freeze. So when you're installing a frost-free hydrant, it's a great idea to put gravel around this little drain hole and at least 3 inches above so that that hole stays nice and clean and clear and the water drains out. That's how a frost-free hydrant works. The other thing I'd like to mention is that any component in the landscape is potential for cross-connection, is potential to contaminate the potable water drinking supply. So we want to try to limit that as much as possible. You know, if water comes out of a pipe, it can go back in a pipe. And so we don't want our irrigation water or the water that's in our garden hose to go back into the water main and contaminate the potable water system. So this is an atmospheric vacuum breaker. And this can be used to keep the water that's in the garden hose in the garden hose. This atmospheric vacuum breaker will keep the water from flowing backwards. It's called back siphonage. In case there's something causing back siphonage, this atmospheric vacuum breaker will keep that from happening. So we talked about the atmospheric vacuum breaker preventing cross connection. This little drain hole at the bottom is another potential problem. This could also cause water to go back into the pipe. So there are newer models where the drain hole is not at the bottom, but it's at the top. And we'll show you that in a minute. So if you're going to use this model where the drain hole is at the bottom, you should have it on an irrigation system or some system that has a backflow prevention device already on the system. So you need to keep that drain hole free so that the water drains out. And you also need to try to protect the water system by having this installed where there is a backflow prevention device like on your irrigation system, or adding an atmospheric vacuum breaker like this to at least keep the water from going backwards in the device. So if you're going to hook up your hydrant to a potable water supply, if you don't have a backflow prevention device, you should consider using one of these newer hydrants that has a different way of draining the water out of the hydrant. So when we turn this on, you can see the water leaks out of here, and we pull that down to allow water to go into the garden hose so that we can utilize it. And then when we're done utilizing the water, of course, we return the hydrant off. Now, to get the water out of the hydrant, we let this run for 30 seconds. So rather than have the water draining out of the bottom, through probably a Venturi effect, the water is getting pulled out of the hydrant and drained out of the top. And so in this way, we're eliminating that cross-connection problem that could be that drain hole at the bottom. And so this is what you want to use if you're doing a system that does not have a backflow prevention device. Also, we should always remove the garden hose in the winter time to help make this frost-free as well. So as you can see, with the garden hose on there, it's trapping water in the hydrant. And so in the winter time, we want to make sure to remove that garden hose to make this be as frost-free as it can.
Today I'm excited to announce that we are in the garden of Dee Nash. Dee Nash is a native Oklahoman and fellow friend and gardener. And Dee is a popular blogger, podcaster, writer, garden coach. I mean, Dee, what else? Did I miss anything?
Didn't miss anything. No, that's good.
So thank you for inviting us. This is your home garden.
It is my home garden.
And also the place where it provides you so much inspiration for what you're
right,
doing.
I think it grew. The more things I did, the more it grew, right?
It's a real habit, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is a real habit.
So today, I mean, there's so much to talk about, but today we're going to talk about daylilies. And I know you have quite an experience. Tell us a little bit about your experience with growing daylilies.
Yeah, daylilies are America's favorite perennial because they're easy. They're super easy to grow, and there's lots of different types. And we were going to talk today a little bit about some of the types. And you really like the U.S.
I do. Can I touch it?
Yeah, you can touch it.
Sorry. I learned that you're not necessarily supposed to touch daylilies in gardens, but because they're very fragile.
They are fragile because they're mostly made up of water, which is why they have diamond dusting, which is that shine that they get onto the petals. But it's also why they die within one day. They only bloom for one day. That's why their name is Hemerocallis, beauty for one day, right?
So you're often looking for a lot of buds on there so that you get more
You want a lot
season.
of buds, and you want a lot of branching. You want good branching. And you also want your scapes to bloom way up out of the foliage, because if they bloom down in the foliage, you can't see them.
Right.
And that you want to see that, right?
Yeah, and they're right up here in our site, so that's nice.
Yeah, I try to pick ones that grow really tall. Of course, the rain this year helped, which made things easier. But this is a single form, and it's not quite it's a trumpet shape, not a bagel shape. Bagels are more rounded.
Okay.
This is a UF, which is an unusual form.
Okay, so this is our more traditional one that we often see.
And yeah, and this is not traditional at all.
But
this particular one has cascading petals, and it's one of my favorites.
Well, I love this. With just the long strappy flowers, it just gives you a lot more color in the garden.
It does give you a lot more color. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit. You have some more UFs down here, which means unusual form.
Unusual form, and UFs can be crispate, which that one over there that is called radiation biohazard is a crispate, a UF crispate. This one is a cascading.
Before we go back to
you love this one.
The radiation biohazard.
Radiation biohazard.
Okay, so most people don't have radiation biohazard in their garden, but I do like yours.
Yeah.
And so what's neat about it is the petals are well, it's like you have your sepals and your petals different colors that create that.
That's true. Yeah, and a lot of times you'll see that on daylilies. Often the petals and the sepals are slightly different, and they're also. This is the most hybridized plant among aficionados.
Daylilies are?
Daylilies are, because they are super easy to hybridize.
Okay.
It's very easy to switch out that pollen, you know? It's
So have
very
you gotten
easy.
into that yet?
No, I have never hybridized. I'm not interested. I think it's too hard and takes too long. That one's Rolling Raven. Rolling Raven is a cascade UF
and so
form.
it's supposed to have that twisted petal.
Yeah, and the hotter it gets, the more those will twist and twirl, and the more those will pinch over there.
Okay.
So that's kind of a cool thing.
And when you say pinching, you're talking about
the end of the petal where it pinches together, that's a crispate form. Okay. So there's a lot. There's
I
a lot
have
to
daylilies. In
daylilies.
this heat, I have other plants that are
I'm
kind of
dripping.
pinching. So here we have another traditional single that's right here, but it looks like it's got that pinched.
It
back
does.
here.
It's
Okay.
it's really also it's not it's not actually a UF, but it's close.
Okay.
And then that's a double. And what's interesting about that one, that's jelly filled donut. Doubles are
Another
really
great name.
I know they do. They name them great names. So jelly filled donut is really great because it doubles consistently. On double forms, you might not get much consistency. I have another double form that hardly ever doubles,
Okay.
and it's Guadalajara. And this one always doubles. So that is a really fine double plant. But it needs to have a little bit more branching, really. See, because we're liable to like break them if
Yeah,
we
they're
pull them too
stuck
much apart.
together there.
But this is good right here. So you just don't want them blooming all at the same time. And then there are also single forms that have toothiness, like raspberry goosebumps over here. It has a toothiness to the
Yeah,
edge.
so I thought that was what you were referring to as ruffles, but that's a
No.
little bit more of a crispier edge. The
Yeah, it's a
toothiness,
crispier edge. Yeah, they worked really hard to go from ruffles to that crispy kind of toothiness. And there's one I think that's called Bites Back or something, which is kind of cute. And then that one over there has ruffles.
Okay, so that's a little bit of a softer ruffle edge to it.
right. And then then we could get into eye zones. I mean, you could really talk about daylilies all day long. But
Okay.
I think the great thing to remember is get ones that bloom up tall out of the foliage.
Mm-hmm.
And also one interesting aspect to daylilies is that you don't feed them with normal flower fertilizer. You want to have bigger clumps so you have more flowers, so you feed them nitrogen.
Oh.
They really love milorganite.
Okay, all right.
They
So
really
you
do.
want to really boast that.
You want to boost it
Yeah,
up.
yeah. So tell us a little bit about also while we're talking about kind of the nutrients and stuff. What soil conditions? Obviously, full sun.
They'll grow in almost any soil conditions at all, but if you want good big clumps, you want to have good consistent watering. I water everything on drip irrigation, and you want to have a real big clump, so you want to feed them early spring. I didn't feed these this year.
Okay.
I'm just being honest. And I don't think they're quite as big as they normally would be, but they're pretty good. I also mulch with fine pine bark because I'm a big fan of that.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, the worms take it down in the soil, and then you have bigger clumps.
Right. And
it's
then
all about the clumps.
How often would you divide those clumps? Is there a clump that gets too big?
No, they don't really get too big, but
Not like
sometimes
iris that might die
No,
or
and they
anything?
don't
Okay.
die in the center
Yeah.
like grasses, for
Right.
example, ornamental grasses. So I don't divide them unless I'm digging them up for somebody to give them to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that a little later. Dee,
You
thank
bet.
you so much
You're-
for sharing your daylilies with us and,
Thank you
and
for
telling us
coming.
a little bit about them.
Thank you.
As money becomes tighter and we grow more concerned about the environment, we thought we would take some time today to share with you 3 tips on how you can save money and landscape your yard that is also environmentally friendly. Tip number 1, do your homework. Now I know as adults we thought we were done doing homework, and maybe that homework has turned more into housework. But if there's homework to be done, wouldn't you rather be in the backyard doing it? So the first thing is to know your backyard. Know the existing conditions. Know whether you have trees or full sun. Know what your soil conditions are like, and also whether you already have native plants or you have other plants in your landscape. Know about those as well. By knowing those things, you will help save yourself money and potential failures as you go forward. For example, if you know in your backyard that you have no shade, whether that's from a pergola or a tree, when you're looking for landscape plants, you're going to want to make sure that you're purchasing things that require full sun. Anything otherwise will possibly lead to failure, which is an added expense if you have to pay for plants that just die. We want you to succeed, so looking for plants that can tolerate your existing conditions in your backyard is important. Also, know your zone. What zone are you in? When you're going to the nursery to look at that plant label, make sure that it is going to live within that zone. And finally, if you haven't done a soil sample, make sure you do one so that you can know the soil conditions. Again, certain plants require certain conditions. The other homework you need to do is know your pests. Know whether you have bugs in your backyard, and not all insects are bad insects. So kind of know about which ones are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones. In fact, there are a lot of beneficial insects. For example, lady beetles. We all know that lady beetles take care of a lot of our aphid problems in our garden. But do you recognize the larva of the lady beetle? It's the larva that's actually going to take care of more of those aphids than the adult is. Therefore, it's important to know the different stages of those insects as well so that you can recognize them regardless of their age. The last thing that you need to do your homework on is your labels. And I'm not talking about your plant labels just yet. I'm talking about any pesticide labels. If you have decided that you need to take care of a pest using a pesticide, whether that's organic or inorganic, you want to make sure that you've read that label. The label is the law. And you'll find on there specifications for the rate at which you should apply. And that's really important to follow those specifications. A lot of times people think more is better, and that is not the case. A lot of research has gone into those specific ratios and measurements that you should use for application. If you under-apply, you're just spending your money on that product and it's not going to be effective for taking care of the pests. If you over-apply, you're spending too much money on that product and you're also introducing additional pollutant into the environment. And of course, with all pesticides, we want to make sure that we've stored them properly away from pets and children. Tip number 2. Think about the right plant for the right location. Now, I know we often say that, but it also means thinking about the right plant for the right location for you. So when we're looking at plants that start grabbing your attention, make sure that we're not including any invasive species. There are a lot of native species, in fact, that do well in both sun and shade conditions. Also, you want to make sure that when you start seeing some of those plants that really grab your attention, that you're looking at the ultimate height and the width of those plants, so that when we plant them in the garden, we know that they're going to have all of the room to really grow and develop. When you're looking at those plant requirements, while it might be the right plant for the right location, you still also have to look as to whether it's the right plant for you. And this is where you've got to be honest with yourself and the level of maintenance you're going to give to your garden. Anybody can hire somebody to come in and install a beautiful landscape, but even that is going to need maintenance. So you need to be honest with how much time you're going to put in your garden or whether you're going to hire somebody to do that maintenance on your garden. Now, the plants you choose can influence that maintenance. If you're looking for something that you don't have to plant every year, you're going to want to lean towards planting more perennials that will return year after year. If you want something that is a little bit more informal looking, so you don't have to trim as many hedges, make sure you go with that more natural look. And then finally, if you're wanting something that is a little more drought tolerant, that'll help you from having to lug around those hoses. Tip number 3, keep conservation in mind. Often in the summertime, we start to see our water bill going up. And so a couple of things that you can do to help reduce that water bill is to zone your irrigation. Whether you have something that's a drought-tolerant garden or a traditional lawn, you want to make sure to water them separately. Often our turf grass or our lawn needs a lot more water than some of our traditional landscapes. You can also reduce the lawn space and incorporate more drought-tolerant plants if that's what you want to do. Another thing you want to maybe try to look at is installing drip irrigation. That ensures that the water is getting right to the base of the plant and you're not losing it to evaporation. And speaking of evaporation, you also want to make sure to install mulch if possible. Putting a nice barrier of mulch 2 to 3 inches down around your plants will reduce the amount of evaporation from those plants up into the air. Also, when it comes time to watering, you want to make sure that you're watering deeply and less frequently through that soil profile. That will ensure that those roots are growing deeper, which will allow them to maintain themselves longer between watering periods. The other thing you might want to think about is going a little more native or natural. So by incorporating more native plants, that doesn't mean it's going to be this wild, overgrown lawn, but it will be plants that are more suitable for your environment, such as the ones that we have here behind us. By incorporating native plants, you're going to notice that you have a lot more wildlife that comes into your backyard, which adds a whole nother dynamic dimension to your landscape. It's not just about pretty aesthetics, but it's also about a habitat for that wildlife. Finally, the last thing that you want to think about is recycling. And in the garden or the landscape, that means compost. So throughout the season, we often have a lot of plant debris that comes out of the garden. Instead of putting that in your trash can or paying to have that hauled away to a landfill, make sure that you're putting that into a compost where it will decompose and then you can reincorporate it into your garden soil. That means less fertilizer and healthier plants later on. So there you have it, 3 simple tips on how to save money while helping the environment. There are a lot of great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead. We've got more plants to explore next week as we delve into hydrangeas. David Hillock is back to introduce the 2021 Oklahoma Proven Shrub. Laura Payne shares a couple of her cool tools. And then, as the temperatures heat up, we head to downtown Oklahoma City to explore horticulture inside. So make sure to join us next week on Oklahoma Gardening. To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussion on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and Tulsa Garden Club.